Lindsay and Tiffany, you guys good? Are you guys good? You guys good? Diana, you good? All right. Welcome to the first meeting of the 2022. Before we get started, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
All right. With everyone present, very exciting evening as we officially welcome 3 new board members to the Dublin Board of Education and their families. At this time, the treasurer will administer the oath of office for the newly elected board members.
We ready? Raise your right hand. I state your name.
Tiffany De Silva.
Do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties as a member of the Board of Education of Dublin City School District, Franklin, Delaware, and Union Counties to the best of my ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereinafter to be enacted during my continuance in said office until my successor is chosen and qualified.
I do.
Doug. Good. Raise your right hand. I state your name.
Lindsay Gillis.
Do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties as a member of the Board of Education of the Dublin City School District, Franklin, Delaware, and Union Counties to the best of my ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereinafter to be enacted during my continuance in said office until my successor is chosen and qualified.
I do.
Congratulations. All right. I state your name.
I, Diana Rigby,
Do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties as a member of the Board of Education of the Dublin City School District, Franklin, Delaware, and Union Counties to the best of my ability in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during my continuance in said office and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
I will.
Congratulations.
At the conclusion of the organizational meeting, before we switch into our regular meeting, we'll take a moment of pause for you to take pictures with your family real quick, and then we'll go from there. All right? As we move on to item C on the agenda, Pledge of Allegiance, we've got some special guests this evening. Mr. Melody, if you'd like to introduce them.
Yes, I would like to ask my 2 grandsons, Tyler and Peyton, to please stand and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Oh, here we go. Sorry. All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Approval of the organization and regular meeting agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Second.
Second.
All right. Second by Mrs. Rigby. Questions or comments? All right. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Election of Board of Education presidents. At this time, we'll take nominations for president of the board. No second is required. I'd like to nominate Mr. Melody as president for the 2022 calendar year. All right. If there is no one else, I will move to close nominations for president of the board. With that said,
Is there a second?
is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. De Silva. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes.
All right. And nominations for vice president of the board.
We got to
Oh.
vote for the election first.
I think we just went through there. All right. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes. Motion passes. Congratulations, Mr. Melody. All right. Nomination for vice president of the board.
I would like to nominate Mr. Valentine for vice president.
All right. Anybody else?
I'll second. Oh, we don't need a second.
Yep, we'll get you on the next one. All right, move to close the nomination. Is there a motion to close it?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll give this one to Ms. Gillis. We'll get everybody involved in the action. All right, at this point, call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Election by voice vote for vice president of the board. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Oath of office for president and vice president.
I state your name.
Scott Melody.
Do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that I will faithfully and impartially perform and discharge the duties as President of the Board of Education for the Dublin City School District, Franklin, Delaware, and Union Counties, Ohio.
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I state your name.
I, Chris Valentine.
Do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that I will faithfully and impartially perform and discharge the duties as Vice President of the Board of Education for the Dublin City School District, Franklin, Delaware, and Union Counties, Ohio.
I do. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess this would probably be a good time to take the break that Mr. Valentin alluded to for a few pictures with family, if anyone would like to do that before we continue on the meeting. So if we could take a 5-minute break.
Good to go.
Organizational meeting. Next up is the establishing meeting for the 2022 calendar year. There's a recommendation to approve the 2022 Board of Education meeting schedule that is attached to board docs. Again, these are the proposed meetings that if they need to be changed or meetings need to be added, we have that flexibility with public notice.
We will have, if there is a meeting change or adding a meeting, we will have proper notices to be sent out through my office and stuff like that too. But this establishes the regular meetings for the year.
Okay. And are we voting on each one of these individually?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the meeting schedule?
I will motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, a resolution to establish the service fund. It is recommended that the Board of Education establish a service fund beginning July 1st, 2022, in the amount of $6,000 for the fiscal year 2023 to provide the board members' expenses in accordance with Section 3315.15 of the Ohio Revised Code. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, membership in the Ohio School Board Association. It is recommended that the Board of Education renew its membership in the Ohio School Board Association, including subscriptions to the annual briefcase and the annual school management news. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Membership in the Legal Assistance Fund. There's a recommendation to approve the resolution to join the OSBA Legal Assistance Fund action. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. The OSBA Annual Business Meeting. It is recommended by the treasurer that the Board of Education appoint a delegate and an alternate to represent the district at the Ohio School Board Association Annual Business Meeting on November 13th, 2022. Do we have a nomination for a delegate?
Tiffany or Lindsay, are either of you guys interested?
I would like to do it.
Okay. I'd like to nominate Tiffany.
Okay. All right. Do we have a nomination for a delegate? And this would be in case the, an alternate, sorry. An alternate. This would be in case the delegate is unavailable for the business meeting.
I would love to be the alternate.
Okay. All right. So the delegate is Tiffany and the alternate is Lindsay. Do we have a
Just got to make a
motion?
Yep.
All right. Do we have a
My motion to approve Tiffany and Lindsay as delegate and alternate.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. All right, now we have a resolution to waive the reading of the meeting minutes. It is recommended that the Board of Education, in accordance with Section 3313.26 of the Ohio Revised Code, waive the reading of the meeting minutes from previous meetings. Do we have a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved.
I'll second.
Okay, any questions or comments?
I appreciate it that I do not have to read them every minute, so every meeting, thank you.
Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. All right, standing authorizations for the board president. There's a resolution adopting standard authorizations for the board president for the calendar year 2022. This is to enable the school district to process state and federal grant applications in a more timely and expedient manner. It is recommended that the board president be authorized to sign all grant applications which require board president signature without seeking prior approval of the board. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. All right, standing authorizations for the treasurer. Resolution adopting standing authorizations for the treasurer for the calendar year 2022 to enable the treasurer to carry out necessary duties involving operations, finances, and purchasing. It is recommended that the Board of Education grant and attach the standing authorizations for the calendar year 2022. And the standing authorizations are attached to board docs. I won't read them in detail, but there are 9 authorizations there. If there are any, do we have a motion to approve?
I will motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. All right, there's a standing authorizations for the superintendent. Resolution adopting standing authorizations for the superintendent for the calendar year 2022 to enable the superintendent to carry out necessary duties involving operations. It is recommended that the Board of Education grant the attached standing authorizations for the calendar year 2022. The authorizations are attached to the board docs, and there are 8 standing authorizations. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. All right, so now we're moving on to board member group health insurance participation. There's a resolution affirming group health insurance participation for board members with premiums being deducted from board members' compensation. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve monthly group health insurance deductions for board members' compensation as a method for board members to purchase health insurance if they choose to enroll in the district healthcare plans. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do I need to read the other statement in public content?
No, I think you're good.
Okay. There are no question and comments. Please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, so now we, moving on to 9B, board member group health insurance participation. Are there any members of the board that would like to announce and enroll in the district health insurance plans? No one this year? Okay. No one chose to enroll. All right, so moving on to special committee assignments. Special committee assignments of the board members. There was a document circulating around earlier in the year with the proposed assignments to the board committees and committee assignments and special committees. We do not need to finalize that tonight. We can re-review that document, and then at the next board meeting, we can have a final list of assignments, and we can enter that into the meeting records and approve it at that time. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so approval of the regular meeting minutes, the approval of the December 16th, 2021 meeting minutes that are attached in board docs. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
And I will second. Any questions or comments?
And then should we just, did you already talk with them about not voting on
Yes.
this? Okay.
All right, so we can please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Abstain.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mrs. Rigby?
Abstain.
Okay, the motion passes 3-0. All right, Dr. Marshausen for presentations.
First, I would like to invite up our PTO presidents at this time.
I haven't been opening them
Okay. Put these on so I can read. Good evening. I'm Scott Kilburn. I'm representing the PTO presidents. I'm one of the co-PTO presidents at Eversole Run Middle School. As citizens who represent our children and Dublin community, you will face complex and demanding challenges. Yet few people fully understand the scope and far-reaching implications of a board member's responsibilities. We as PTO presidents want to recognize the vital contributions you will make to our district and focus attention on the crucial role you play as elected officials in the education of our children. Thank you for the difference you make for our students. Your position is to establish a vision for the education programs, design a structure to achieve that vision, assure schools are accountable to the community, and strongly advocate continuous improvement in student learning and safety. This entails many meetings and school functions to attend, reports, agendas, proposals and other information to read, as well as a host of difficult decisions to make. While each of you wear many hats in the workday world, as school board members, you will put on a collective hat to focus on leading our school district. Board members must work together as a team toward a common goal, which is helping students achieve in a safe and supportive environment. While as individuals you may disagree on issues from time to time, your role as a board is to consistently strive toward the goal of making Dublin a premier school district. Each of you will contribute many hours each year leading the Dublin School District. Whether crafting policies, analyzing growth projections, determining the needs for the next potential levy, hiring administrators, listening to staff and student concerns, or recognizing outstanding programs and student achievements, as board members, you will always keep your eyes on the prize of student achievement. It is clear to all of us that know you that your love of learning and concern and caring for students, staff, and the community drive your desire to lead so students can achieve and succeed. From all of us, Dublin City School PTO presidents, we thank you for your time, commitment, and caring for the parents, staff, and students. Thanks.
Thank you. And as a thank you. That's amazing. You know what, we're gonna put them right here. You all enjoy them. All right, they're free up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind comments.
Thank you. As January is Board Member Appreciation Month, we are so thankful for our partnership and our president's willingness to come tonight and share some thoughts. So thank you to all of the PTO presidents that I have the opportunity to meet with on a monthly basis and everything our PTO does to support our schools. We appreciate you and all that you do as well. Thanks for being here tonight. It is now time in the agenda for our every meeting COVID update. And as we have 3 new board members with us tonight and a renewed interest in the mitigation strategies and practices that we have, I thought it first worthwhile to kind of review the decision-making process that we use as an administrative team on a monthly basis. Throughout the first part of this school year, we've done this every month, and I have the opportunity to share an update with the Board of Education, but it's not merely an update from a single person, the superintendent. It's an update from a team that works tirelessly, not only during the workday, but on nights and weekends to make sure that we have all of the information possible when making decisions for our community. Several of us are on weekly calls with Franklin County Public Health, from my weekly call with the health commissioners at the county and the Columbus Health Commissioner, Dr. Roberts, to Mr. Andrus and his team on the nurses' calls and the calls with our health commissioners and Franklin County Public Health providing guidance, to the conversations that we're able to have with our leaders at the Ohio Department of Health. And Dublin is a district that has access to direct conversations with the Assistant Director at the Ohio Department of Health, Director Himes, and with Commissioner Mazzola. And over the last 2 years, serving 2 different districts, I've had the opportunity to get to know Commissioner Mazzola very well. And he is a great partner. He understands the Dublin City School community. And as we make decisions for Dublin, he has consistently, throughout the 2 years of this pandemic, been willing to support us in our local decision and to do what's necessary to support our children and our families. One of the most important places that we get information is from our school nurses through Executive Director Andrus. Over the course of the first semester of this school year, as we've made decisions at our school level, and let's talk high school level for a moment, as we've gone through the mask to stay process and some of the decisions made at the high school, we've been able to come to our Board of Education and say, we see very few students flipping from modified quarantine to positive. That's because of the amazing job that our nurses do. We've been able to say, yes, there are 18 cases at Bailey Elementary, and we can track 12 of them to 1 sleepover. As our nurses go through this process, they are our front line in providing information to our team and thus to the board when we make recommendations as to what's best for our community. We get input on a regular basis from our municipal and state leaders. Just yesterday, I had the opportunity to converse with City Manager Dana McDaniel, Chief of Police, and our city leaders in Dublin to find out where are they going to be as they chart a path forward for our community. We have the opportunity to talk directly with representatives from Governor DeWine's office, had a phone conversation just this morning with the Lieutenant Governor, who said it's a local decision. You make the best recommendations for your community at the local level. And that's what we do. Ohio is a local control district. And while there are recommendations from state agencies and from county agencies, in a state with 611 school districts, with such diversity across the state, at this time the decisions have been left to us to make those recommendations. We also have engagement on a regular basis with epidemiologists and infectious health experts at Ohio State University. I'm proud that I was the superintendent who worked with these folks to start the CATS data over 2 years ago. I had the good fortune with colleagues from Ohio State to be published in peer-reviewed journals about the CATS data, and we get to talk to those folks
as we make recommendations at the local level. So what I'd like our community and our board to know is that when we make these recommendations, the recommendations aren't made as a single superintendent sitting in an office saying, I don't think we need masks right now. We make these recommendations after talking to numerous people at different levels. And I inadvertently skipped our medical advisory committee, who we had a call with that Mr. Valentine and Mr. Melody joined us this past week. And our medical advisory committee provides one source of updates. Now, when we take all this information, we also look at this through an education lens. We work with DEA and our teaching partners. We work as educators to say, what are the impacts of the decisions that we're making from an educational standpoint? Because this isn't just about a single issue. From a school district standpoint, if all we did was make decisions based on infectious diseases, no one would ever leave their home. So what we do is we take all this information and we look for a balanced approach to best serve our students and our community. We also meet frequently with our principals and our administrators and our operations staff and our transportation leaders, because we live in a very diverse community. And all you have to do is walk around Dublin on any given day and walk Bridge Street to Kroger to Lowe's to the people who are having their food put in their car at Kroger because they don't want to go into the store. The diversity in our community is clear in the mitigation approaches taken by individual families. As a board and as an administrative team, we have gone out of our way to acknowledge the fact that parents have choice in the mitigation strategies and the health decisions that they make for their families. There are some places that there are laws. The Ohio Department of Health has an extensive list of vaccinations that are required for children to enter kindergarten. Of course, we follow the Ohio Department of Health orders and laws. When there's flexibility provided to the district, our goal is to acknowledge that flexibility and recognize that as we make policies moving forward. With this in mind, in 2021-22, we have a mask exemption process for the places that we have mask orders. That mask exemption process is outlined in policy. It lists the places and the reasons where parents could choose to exempt their children from the district's mask mandate. This is very different than the process that there was in 2020-2021. In the previous year, there was an order from the Ohio Department of Health. If the health department issued an order today, we would have a K-12 mandate today. And if that was the case, that's what we would do. As the superintendent, what I try to do is find balance and to find a balanced approach in a diverse community. I think as the leader of a district like Dublin, it's my responsibility to not drive wedges, but to try to find common ground. And there's very few things that we do in education that require absolutes. When we talk about reading strategies, any elementary teacher would tell you there are lots of ways to teach reading. When you look at teaching numeracy, when you look at every child needing a personal experience, we've got a lot of flexibility and we look for that balanced approach. That's what I try to do as a superintendent when it comes to decisions. The behavior in our community is right now somewhat divided. And we have to acknowledge that as district leaders. When we look at sporting events that took place this past week, while not at all the events, from what was reported to me by asking our principals, it was less than 20% of the people were masked at basketball games, at wrestling meets, at hockey games. That's 20% of the adults in the stands. That's a community decision that we have to face that reality that that's how our community is behaving. The city of Dublin is a masked, encouraged city in public spaces. If the city of Dublin had a mask order for indoor public spaces, we would, of course, follow. If that was a city order, we would follow. But the city is a masked encouraged space. As we make recommendations to our community, right now, one of our biggest concern is the overload of our nurses. As our cases increase, which is bound to happen with the Omicron virus, our nurses right now are simply unable to keep up with contact tracing. And when we talk about contact tracing, we talk about a high school student who may be COVID positive. The nurse has to talk to every teacher in every class to say who's sitting within 6 feet of that student for 15 minutes or more. If you think about our kids having 6 classes, plus who they sat around at lunch, plus any activities that they may be in, you're talking about significant time for each nurse to contact trace each student. We have to find a way to better allow our nurses to do their jobs. And part of that will be in a recommendation that I'll be making tonight. There's a difference between us also at the school level, putting a mask mandate in place, potentially without exemptions, and then denying education based on a decision that was a school board decision. I struggle with that. Right now, the policy permits me as the superintendent to enact or withdraw a mask mandate. I have said from the jump that I will take the direction for the Board of Education, and it will be my intent tonight to ask the Board of Education, each individual member, where would you like us to go with the options that we're providing or in a different option? But I have a hard time denying education that's something that's not a public health order. If the health department said there's a mask order, I got it. I followed. No, please, no. We would follow those orders if that's where we were going. So as we go through and talk about what the different options we have, we do this balanced approach. We know that as a community, it's not just masking as the only mitigation strategy. I don't know a single district in the state of Ohio that has offered more vaccination clinics to their community, including today at 2 schools where we held vaccination clinics during the school day where mom and dad could give permission and the health company administered the vaccinations during the school day. Let me be clear, we're not vaccinating students, but our pharmacy partner with the approval of parents provided vaccines today in 2 of our schools, and we're gonna run all the way through all of our elementary schools. We've probably had 12 clinics to date. We've got booster clinics on the calendar for the students who are now available to booster shots. I'd be hard pressed, and I would challenge anyone to find a district who offers more clinics than we do. We also understand, and I would say without a doubt, masks can slow the spread of COVID when worn correctly and the right masks. But I also would say it comes at a cost. And I've been proud during the fall of this year that our teachers have been able to take off those masks at times to teach their kids. We know that teachers are more effective when kids can see their faces. We know that we communicate more clearly when we're able to see those nonverbals. These aren't negotiables. They're what we know as educators. So there is a cost to wearing masks. There's a time for masks when spread is high and when we know that it's in a classroom, but there's also a time that the term we use in special ed would be least restrictive environment. We want to create the least restrictive environment for our kids to learn. We have also implemented district-wide mask to stay and test to play. Ohio Department of Health has been very supportive. Mr. Andrus and his team, when we ask for tests, they're available to our students. While other people may be short on tests, we have tests to implement the testing necessary to keep our students in school as much as possible. We also have experience with the recommendation and the guidance from health officials. Our health department and our health officials have been awesome. But our experience tells us that last year we could have been back to school faster. As the superintendent of a neighboring district, we know when we compared the data in Columbus area districts to the data in Mason and Lakota and districts that went all in all last year, our data was the same. We could have been all in last year much sooner and longer. So when we listen to the recommendations, we understand health officials look at things through a lens of public health. We have a responsibility as educational leaders to look at that lens and say, what have we seen and what do we think is best for our students? As I said earlier, we will follow all local laws and orders at the state and federal levels. ODH has the authority to declare an emergency and issue a mask mandate. Period, end of story. They have that authority. Franklin County Public Health has the authority regarding quarantines and isolations. When our nurses contact you as parents and say, your child is a close contact in a classroom, Franklin County Public Health, we act on their behalf to say as a close contact, it's masked to stay or you're quarantined. We ask you to follow those recommendations. If you don't, Franklin County Public Health will issue quarantine letters. That's not us. We're acting on the behalf of the health department. So as we look at a balanced approach in a community that's divided, there are really three things that we want to look at. And before we get to those, here in the presentation is where all of our data is. So I'll run through this. This is all on the website. It was updated as of today. We have 6.3% of our students who have a mask exemption at this point. There are several schools that have higher mask exemption percentages than other schools. And this is where we are with the mask exemption. I believe it was 900 plus students have been on this form one way or another this year. As of today, we have 446 positive students and 91 COVID positive staff members. This mirrors neighboring districts when you look at per student counts, and this is consistent with us being the 8th largest district in the state of Ohio, that we know we're going to have COVID cases right now. We have 14 students and 14 staff members and 23 students in quarantine. We'll see less traditional quarantine because of modified quarantines and because of changes that the health departments have now made outside of school that really is a voluntary participation sport. Modified quarantine, you're going to see a lot of kids in modified quarantine, 545 and 68 staff members right now in modified quarantine. These are folks who fall under mask to stay in large part. And from a school perspective, these are exposures that take place in the school setting. All right, so here's where I think the three options are, and I will tell you where I think that we are, and I'll talk a little bit about where we are in terms of recommendations from other bodies too. I think option number one would be keep the current policy with masking and shift to what some of our neighboring districts are doing, which is simply sending a letter home if your child is a close contact. So if there's a case in your child's class, let me rephrase that, not a close contact, sending a letter home if there's a case in your child's classroom. There are several districts whose boards of education are considering this tonight, where if there's a case in your child's class, you get a letter, and it's the parent's responsibility to mask to stay and put your own child in modified quarantine. This would relieve our nurses of doing the classroom level contact tracing, and if there's a case in any class, we're going to send a letter home and say, here are the people who were in that classroom. Recommendation number 2 is stick with the current mask mandatory pre-K 8, recommended grades 9 through 12. But In order to relieve the stress of our nurses, and in light of the increases that are taking place in our buildings, we would make contact tracing simply to the classroom level. So if a student is in a classroom where someone had COVID while they were in that classroom, and they would have been considered someone we would have contact traced in that room, that class just goes into modified quarantine and mask to stay. At the high school level, a student who is in first period geometry and then goes English 1, world studies, earth science, and went through the day today potentially COVID positive, if that student identifies as being COVID positive tomorrow, all the students in all those classes would mask for 10 calendar days. The teachers would put a note up on the board, first period, modified quarantine until 1/20/22. So it would be handled at the classroom level. It would take the strain off of our nurses. The letters would come from your teachers, and it would allow us to keep rolling and allow those nurses to get a break as they do that. The third option would be we issue a pre-K-12 mask mandate. Under the current policy, mask exemptions would now be available to high school students. High school parents would be able to fill out the exemption form, and then we would send the letters to families if you were direct contact or if there was COVID in your classroom. The assumption being most of the kids in those classrooms would be masked. A couple things that I want to note. A letter went out for Mr. Valentine, Mr. Melody, and myself last week asking our staff and our high school students to wear masks. From our principals, even as of today, 75 to 80% of our kids are voluntarily wearing masks in our high schools. When asked, our students have been wearing masks. That letter asked for 2 weeks for you voluntarily wear masks. Of these three proposals, when we shared with our medical advisory committee on this past week, and when we get to the discussion, I'm sure Mr. Melody and Mr. Valentine can share because they were on that call. Every doctor, when we started the call, wanted a mask mandate at the start of the call. As we explained the mask to stay option, 8 of the 11 doctors on that call felt like the mask to stay option was a reasonable middle ground. That it doesn't put us in a position that we are suspending students or potentially disciplining students for not following the rules, that if a student was asked to mask, it would be with the support of the health department. On that call was also our DEA Association President, Donna O'Connor. Our teachers can support this. It makes it easier for our nurses. It makes it at the classroom level. When we talk about this at the administration level, unanimously, this is where our administration feels that we are. If you look at this, it's a middle ground. I understand there are people who don't want any mask mandates. As cases go down, as things go down, if there's not COVID in your child's classroom, there's not a mask mandate. Your exemption form would still hold. I know there are people who think everyone should be masked, and if you're not masked, you shouldn't be permitted in school. We live in a pretty diverse community. The goal is for this to be that middle ground. When working with Commissioner Mazzola, and this presentation's online if anybody wants to see this. Commissioner Mazzola appreciates and celebrates our extensive efforts in the Dublin City Schools to mitigate COVID-19. It's not just masking. There's no district that I know of that has better air filtration systems than Dublin. We have MERV 14 and 15 filters in every building in our school district. Other districts can't say that. Jeff Stark and his team come in on the weekends and we bring in an external team to do deep cleaning. And we do deep cleaning that lasts beyond the time that it's cleaned. We hand out 3-ply surgical grade masks to our students as they come in the buildings, and they're available to our students and our teachers. Mitigation strategies go beyond masking, and we make those available. Commissioner Mazzola says that he is in support of our intention to consider this new classroom-based exposure policy, and that they're willing to work with the Dublin City School District on effective implementation of this policy. So Franklin County Public Health is willing to work with us on that. So at this time, I'll open it up to any board member questions before I ask the board members for any feedback that they have.
Yeah, I have some questions. With option 2, is Franklin County Public Health making distinctions between a masked or unmasked exposure in the classroom?
No, it would just simply be the classroom. The Franklin County Public Health will support our decision to say, you've been in a classroom, you now would be in modified quarantine.
How quickly are letters going to come out at a classroom level?
It's actually easier for us because as our teachers work with Mr. Gill through School Messenger, if there's a positive case identified, and right now I'm talking high school, because at elementary this is much easier. But at high school and middle school, you pull the student schedule, you add all the emails to a list, and you send it out to all of those teachers. The letters will come from the teachers that this student in this class has been identified, and that this class now, your child has been in this class, and they now qualify for modified quarantine. So it will be much quicker than potentially what we've been doing now.
Another question. So with option number 2, when would you expect to see, just based on current rates of positive cases that we have right now, when would you expect to see all of the classrooms having this mandatory mask to stay situation?
It would be hard to tell. Last week we had crazy high numbers on Monday and Tuesday, but those students weren't in school, so they wouldn't have triggered it. Today we entered, say, 42 students at Jerome. Like, I might be right there. Am I right there? 42 students at Jerome. None of those students today would trigger any letters because those students would have been, the 48 hours previous wouldn't have been in school. So starting tomorrow, it depends what the numbers are and how quickly we would see spread in our schools. By last Thursday and Friday, we were looking at 6 students. I think on Friday it was 667 were our high school numbers. Each one of those students could trigger potentially 200, 300 students being masked to stay. It just depends on where they are and how long it takes. And hopefully this starts to slow down. So I don't have a number, but it would be a lot faster than where we're going now.
When do we get to make a comment?
You can comment.
Okay, so I was doing some math today when I was looking at this, and I just looked back at the last 90 days, and I have 3 kids, and I was looking at the number of notifications that I got, and it was 13 classroom exposures in the last 90 days. 2 of those were multiples, so one was a 2 exposure and one was a 3 exposure. And then I had 3 close contact exposures, and two of those were from sports. But working it all out, it looks like about a exposure a week if you average it out. So that would be almost 90 days worth of mandatory mask to stay, or modified quarantines for students.
And Mrs. De Silva, my plan right now would be to ask the board to consider this for the next 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, we have the opportunity to have this conversation like we've had the opportunity at every board meeting since August. So if that was something right now, while numbers are high, and this is a practice that this board would support right now, we come together on the 24th and get back to where we are then. So this is my and our team's recommendation today, based on where numbers are today and based on health recommendations today.
Dr. Marshausen, what about for the cases that high school seems to be a different animal? I have 2 in high school and one in elementary. So the requirements for my 8-year-old to return to 2nd grade when she has the sniffles seems to be very different from the requirements of the staff and nurses or whoever at attendance for my kids to come back for whatever reason they missed school in their sophomore and senior years. So my concern and my thought is, now that we're saying entire classrooms are going to mask, so if you started in 1 period, you went through all 7 periods, you've exposed everyone now. Why would they report? Why would they test and then tell anyone?
Well, I think that our community, first of all, has shown a willingness to test and to report. When you look at where our numbers are, we are clearly testing and reporting, and not everyone is doing that, but we're seeing that. The other thing is, and I can just give you an example yesterday of one of our teams. We do mandatory testing when some of our teams are positive. So there are times that in the test to play arena, we administer tests, and then our parents are very interested. We're getting the positive cases reported to us.
Can you explain to us some of the difference, or I guess the difference, between having a mask requirement in K through 8 versus having a mask requirement for 9 through 12?
Well, at the time when the mask requirements were put in place, the mask requirement in K through 8 was there because there wasn't vaccinations available. I had a slide that I'd taken out for this month's meeting because the intent would have been, as explained in November, that with elementary vaccinations, my hope had been that we would be announcing today that we would be removing the K to 8 mask requirement. Obviously, right now, that is not my recommendation. We don't see, well, for 2 reasons. One, Omicron, that's point blank right in front of us. Also, our vaccination rates aren't where we hoped that they would be. As I shared with our doctors committee, I am a little concerned that I think we are downplaying the importance of vaccinations during this latest spike, and that we're missing the boat as an opportunity to get more people vaccinated. I don't pretend to be a medical expert. As I said, we take all this together, but from everything that we are told, vaccination still protects you against severe illness and against hospitalization. And I think this latest spike has slowed some people from getting that vaccination. Mrs. De Silva, that was the original reason why we had the K to 8 mandate.
Do you know, or do you have any stats on how many of our high school students who have gotten boosters or that would want boosters? I know that Children's Hospital just today opened their system up to 15 and younger.
I don't have those numbers, and Chris is shaking his head that we don't have those numbers, but I do know we're also offering those booster clinics here. We will offer those booster clinics in Dublin as well.
Do we have dates for boosters?
He's shaking his head yes, so that means they're either posted or they'll be posted.
Dr. Marshausen, do we currently have any staff members and or students or within the past couple of months that are hospitalized?
We do not know of any students who have been hospitalized or any staff members who have been hospitalized with COVID since the start of this school year. I am well aware, and I know there was a very difficult situation last year with a student, and we did have a student who really struggled. But since the start of this school year, we are unaware of anyone who has been hospitalized from our related or attending our school who has been hospitalized.
Dr. Marshausen, what happens in option 2 as far as the students who have exemptions?
The exemptions for ODH do not qualify you as being exempt under modified quarantine. So a mask exemption through the district is not a mask exemption from the Ohio Department of Health or Franklin County Public Health. And we've had situations this year in elementary classes where there's been a COVID positive case in an elementary room, and nurses have contacted the parents and said, your child has a mask exemption. Here are your options. You can either come to school masked for this fixed period of time, or you can stay home as a quarantine.
What happens underneath that scenario where a parent comes to school with their child?
It hasn't happened at this point.
Well, the hypothetical of we're in modified option 2.
The health department under modified quarantine would issue a quarantine letter to that family saying that the Franklin County Department of Health is placing the child in quarantine, and here are your options.
If we are underneath the mandate, what happens in that instance? And when I say mandate, district mandate.
So if we do not have the backing of the health department, and let's say we had a K-12 mandate and a parent refused for a child to wear a mask, according to our policy, that is a dress code violation, and it would go through the discipline process as a dress code violation.
In terms of your administrative time or our administrator's time, what does a mandate do to their daily schedule?
Just being totally open and honest, if we had to implement mask exemptions at the high school, it's going to take a lot of time. So if we put in and I'm not making excuses, I'm just trying to be open and honest with the 5 of you here. If we said we're going to do a K-12 mask mandate, and we're going to start it on Wednesday morning, tomorrow we would open up the exemption form to 9th through 12th graders. It's still out there, but it would 9th through 12th grade families would have the option to hit the exemption form. Several things would happen. One, I'm not sure how at the high school level we identify the kid who has an exemption and the kid who doesn't. It's easy in Dr. Bailey's 3rd grade English class because she's got 25 kids, and exempt, not exempt, we can figure that out. In the middle school, it's been a bit of a challenge. In a high school, it'll be a lot, because how do you know which kids are exempt and which kids aren't as they make their way through the high school? So now we're looking at lists, developing systems to try to identify those things, and letting teachers know this kid should be wearing a mask, this kid doesn't need to, and so forth. The other problem is, and these are kids, Mr. Gill and I have been talking, how do we notify parents about the exemption form being filled out? Because there may be a child or two who does it on their own. So now we're talking about having to generate on a consistent basis notifications to parents saying that Mrs. Schwanke, your high school freshman filled out an exemption form and the exemption's been granted. And then what happens when the parent says, well, I didn't fill that out? So then we have to have a process for parents to let us know that their kid filled it out without their approval, or maybe mom and dad are just like, okay, or maybe mom and dad did fill it out. But we'll have to let parents know. So there is some administrative time going through the process with the mask exemptions. and how do we apply that at the high school level?
Lakota, Mason, New Albany.
Lakota, Mason, and New Albany are all now mask recommended. When we look at neighboring districts, Olentangy mirrors what we have. Southwestern City Schools mirrors what we have. UA, Hilliard, Westerville, Worthington all have K-12 mandates in place. And just in a conversation that I had with Devin Babcock, who's the governor's aide, 40% of the districts in the state of Ohio have mask mandates, 60% do not. And I think largely this is and I've said this to the lieutenant governor, there are probably about 20 suburban school districts that you keep putting in the crosshairs. Because if you look at the counties outside of Franklin, if you go to Madison, I had lunch with Dr. Hoadley last week. There's no mask mandate in any other tolls districts besides Hilliard and Dublin. The Madison County's no mask mandates, Union County's no mask mandates, and then the urbans just all mask up. And there are probably about 20 superintendents who are living this and 20 school boards who are living this like we are. And it's in diverse districts where you have highly educated, smart people who all have different opinions about how we should be doing this.
Has there been a, I guess, meta-analysis of different schools, their current protocols in place and what that does to students in quarantine and modified quarantine, what those numbers look like? Do we know if there's a difference in these mitigation strategies and what's working and what isn't?
There hasn't been an official scientific peer-reviewed journal of what's happening in Ohio. Anecdotally from the fall, I can tell you the districts that had mask mandates and didn't have mask mandates, our high school numbers look the same. You know, if you've been following Hilliard, New Albany, Olentangy, Westerville, Worthington, and we've all been about the same. And we've had K-8 mask mandate and 9-12 mask recommended. And our high school numbers have all been very similar. But I don't think there has been a meta-analysis in a peer-reviewed journal. I can tell you from my work on the faculty at Ohio State, this is going to be a decade-long research process because we're not going to know for a generation the impact this has had on our children. And I think we can say with a high level of confidence that for all kids, this is going to have an impact. A third grader today is never going to catch up to where a third grader was in 18 because we're going now on the second year, third school year for these kids where we've disrupted their education. When I get to my report later, I'll talk about social, emotional, and mental health and what we're now seeing from our kiddos. And it's no one's fault. COVID's no one's fault. As we look at how we've all responded, every school district has made the best decisions that they felt were available to them. But it would be foolish to say that there's not going to be a significant impact on these kiddos.
Yes, and just to be clear, when I was asking for neighboring schools, I wasn't looking for a peer-reviewed journal,
Okay.
but I think that we have to look at the evidence before us, and I think we have to look at evidence-based medicine and look at, what's happening in these neighboring school districts, who have different protocols as well as those who have similar protocols and are of similar size, and I think it's important to look because there are so many factors in addition to just masking. What are we doing here? And there's a lot more impact on that child in learning, in social, emotional. There's a cost involved, I guess is what I'm saying. And, I think it's important to look at the total cost.
among superintendents, there's a lot of conversations about what happens outside of school. When we look at our high school students, when we look at our kids who are in OP soccer and Club Ohio soccer, and they're playing youth basketball, and they're going to church, and they're in their youth groups, and they're doing all of these things, schools can't be the only piece of this layered approach. And when people look at schools like you're the end game to stopping COVID, but what's happening outside of schools isn't the same thing, then the community spreads the community spread. And I think when we look around, all you've got to do is go walk down Bridge Street right now. And when you look at the communities that have mask mandates, I don't know if anybody's been to a Blue Jackets game, or I haven't been to a Buckeye game, but I've watched them on TV, and they're not wearing their masks.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to just point out that we're talking about things in the community, going to games and such. Kids are required by law to attend school, and it's our duty to make sure that they have a safe place to come and learn. So it's not, I don't think the comparisons between, going to a hockey game is the equivalent of sitting in a classroom. Because there are some parents who will not go to a hockey game, and they expect that when their kids come to school that they will have a safe environment.
I think when we look at community spread and the numbers, and I was referring to, as Mrs. Rigby asked, about numbers between different communities and different schools. I don't think we can say that the school is the only contributing factor to the community spread. I was answering that question directly.
Dr. Marshausen, the statement, schools can't be the only piece. I agree with that 100%. I guess what I'm asking is, if we want to look at this in a 2-week short-term solution, I guess a big picture is, what are we trying to solve? If we keep doing what we're doing right now, what's the outcome? If we change to one of these other options, what do you foresee the outcome? I'm thinking about busing and staffing and a full level disruption, not just being ill.
Our transportation numbers are because we did not have, and no one has, enough substitute bus drivers. And I will praise our bus drivers later on my report, because our bus drivers are heroes. We all had a bus driver shortage pre-COVID. So the fact that we have 20 bus drivers out, that is what it is. Right now, we are very confident in our substitutes. Mr. Boney and his team did a great job hiring district-level substitutes. We have been covering our classrooms, and I'm really confident where we are. So, Mrs. Gillis, there are 3 things. When you look at the option number 1, it saves our nurses by eliminating contact tracing, and we just send home letters. So option 1 purely is relief for our nurses. Option 2 relieves our nurses, and it will result in more students being masked during this peak time in our classrooms. We did not enforce mask to stay with a lot of intention in the fall. We didn't need to. We notified parents your child was a direct contact at the high school level, but we didn't chase around kids to make sure they were wearing masks at the high school level. We didn't see kids flipping, so we didn't need to spend a lot of manpower enforcing that. We're at this point needing to enforce mask to stay, and enforcing mask to stay at a classroom level is significantly easier. So I believe option 2 is more enforceable, and I believe it would get more students masked. Option 3 will get more students masked than we have now, but it will result in a significant level of work on our administrative team, and it will result in what probably would be an unenforceable policy at after-school events. City Manager McDaniel and Chief of Police Pice have said the police are not removing people from sporting events. Our administrators aren't going to create conflicts with people at sporting events. And talking with neighboring superintendents that have mask mandates at sporting events, we will make announcements, we will make masks available, but if adults aren't wearing masks at the sporting event, after asking them once, we're done. We don't have, I can't put our administrators in a position where they're getting in confrontations with community members who don't want to wear masks. And the police have said that even when it was an order in Dublin, they didn't remove people from spaces for not following the mask mandate. So if we went with option 3 and said we were going to mandate masks at events in a place that, and I'm only speculating, and you might think I'm wrong, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. If we were at a Jerome basketball game that had 5% of the people masked on Friday night, and it got to 70% of the people masked, then a mask mandate would increase the number of people there who are wearing masks. This 30% of the people are going to be the 30% of the people. So I believe that we would get more people masked with less disruption and less confrontation with option 2, which is why that's what our administrative team supports. And I think that's where, and Mr. Melody and Mr. Valentine can chime in, all but 3 of the doctors, I think, felt that that was something that they could support as we moved forward, looking at different options as a board and as a district.
Question about after-school events. Is there a plan to offer masks to people as they come in, as we're doing with students in the high school?
They're available now next to a sandwich board at every sporting event. Yep, they're available when people come in.
Dr. Marshausen, my thought, kind of bouncing off of what Tiffany said earlier about providing everybody has the right to a safe education, right? And so I'm thinking about the families that aren't going to Blue Jackets games or aren't going to Buckeye games or aren't going out in the community or whatever. How are we kind of looking at the big picture of everyone? How are we providing that protection? What if the only place they are going is school?
Well, and Mrs. Gillis, my hope is, and I hope I've articulated this, I'm trying to find that middle. I'm trying to find that, I think as a leader, you try to bring people together. And in the city, in the community of the Dublin City School District, I think that a mask mandate is one approach to get there, and my recommendation is an approach that I think, yes, while some people will be concerned, I'm trying to build a consensus and bring folks together. We will, for the foreseeable future, I don't know a time in any of our careers where we won't be mask welcome. I see some folks here in our audience wearing the N95 and KN95 masks, where it would give the wearer a different level of protection. If we have children who have underlying health conditions, our teams have worked with them through our teachers and our team to try to create the best environment for that individual student. I don't think there's something that we can do that will make everyone happy. And our recommendation is this approach for 2 weeks and to see where we are. And I think everyone in the room, regardless of your beliefs about our mitigation strategies, is hopeful that 2 weeks from now, this spike will come down as fast as it went up, and we'll be able to have a different conversation.
So option 2 would be for 2 weeks to start out, and then you evaluate or reevaluate. Is that what you're saying?
I have committed, and we committed by board resolution in August, I believe, that I will come to you all every Board of Education meeting and give you an update and ask for your input. The next board meeting is the 24th. So that's why I say 2 weeks.
Question, as it relates to students, again, who may have underlying conditions or just may not feel comfortable being in an unmasked situation, are we looking at how many students are unmasked in a particular classroom? And then also, are we making sure that if a student feels uncomfortable, for instance, being paired or having an assigned seat next to a student who is unmasked, how are we handling those types of situations?
Those situations would be handled at the classroom level and then the building level, and I don't have a count for how many students are unmasked. I know that when we've looked at our high schools, since we've sent out that letter, the numbers have significantly increased. I don't know where those numbers will go the longer we continue with this. We know the percentage of students at the elementary that have those mask exemptions. Those are, we talked about those earlier, and they're on the website. And I have great confidence in our teachers that if a parent contacted an elementary teacher and said, my kid's not comfortable, I'd like my kid sitting with other students who are masked, I have every confidence that our teachers are responsive to parents' concerns.
And one more question. So with the doctors and the medical committee, did they give you a sense of how many cases that we could expect if we were to go with mask mandatory option number 2, considering that it's not triggered until there is a positive case? Did they give us any guidance around that, or what did they say? I know that with Omicron, we have a shortened isolation period because it is more contagious, but it also has a shorter incubation period. So most people will show symptoms or be actually more contagious within the first 1 or 2 days before they show symptoms, and then the 2 to 3 days after they show symptoms.
I don't think anyone on that committee is an epidemiologist that would care to guess numbers.
Right.
There are several doctors on that committee who are very concerned that this is a reactive strategy. In fact, there are 3 who did not support this. The majority of them, after having the same conversations we've had tonight, Scott and Chris, I think they said, oh, yeah, we get this. We understand why this is what you'd want to do, and we can support this. Got several texts and emails from on the days following saying, good job, really creative. This is something that Chris and I and our team discussed and proposed to the Ohio Department of Health and Franklin County Public Health as a way to save our nurses from what our nurses are going through right now. But no, they would not. I did not ask them, how fast do you think it would go with A? How fast do you think it would go with B?
So the mask mandatory option number 2 is basically a strategy to make contact tracing easier versus slow the spread, or?
Well, I think it
Is
does
that correct?
both, and I think the reason Commissioner Mazzola is in fact in favor of it is it will result in significantly more students being masked in our high schools. Because right now, let's just say that that student in first period, it might result, depending on when they sat in their classroom, at 5 kids in this room, at 7 kids in this room, at 4 kids in this room, and the nurse would have to go through and look who are the people sitting in the desks surrounding that student. And now instead of being potentially 5 students in geometry, it's 25 kids. So this will result in more masking quickly as the process goes through, which is why I don't know if this is forever, but right now it seems like a way to relieve the stress on our nurses while still being true to the mask to stay approach. And I know there are some parents who are here tonight who would say, I don't want my kid to wear a mask. And wait a second, I thought it was 6 feet, and now you're going to mask the whole class. And my hope with all of our parents would be that you understand the situation that we're in right now with the inability to contact trace with the speed of numbers. And I would ask our community, give us 2 weeks. And we'll come back and we'll see where numbers are, and we'll have this conversation again. Allow us the opportunity to get through this latest surge. We're not mandating, we're not taking away the exemptions, and as long as there's not COVID in your kid's class, you're good to go. If their COVID is in your kid's class, we're going to ask you during this next couple weeks that you allow us to find this middle ground in a diverse community, and I will come back to you as a group again.
Dr. Marshausen, one of the concerns that, Scott, I know you and I talked about maybe coming from different angles is when we come back in that 2 weeks, you outlined the different factors that we utilize as we try to make decisions on what mode we're in, how we're handling this. Can you elaborate on how you would anticipate 2 weeks from now, if we were in that middle scenario, how you would approach it?
Well, a couple things. There's a resolution today for remote learning on the agenda. No one wants to go to remote learning. I don't want to go to remote learning. If our staff is available, we're not going to remote learning. That resolution is on there for emergency situations. That resolution is on there for the preschool that we didn't have bus drivers, so they had to go remote learning for 1 day. Really, that resolution's there so that if we get a bunch of snow days, we don't end up having to go to school in June. Because if we're permitted to go to remote learning for COVID, I don't want to burn calamity days for COVID days. So that resolution's on there as an emergency. That resolution is what the airlines tell you, put your air mask on, your oxygen on if it falls down. That's what that resolution's there for. I think, one, we got to look at absence rates. We have to look at staffing levels, and we have to look at case counts. And when we look at those things and the number of students who have COVID, we hovered for 3 months in the 75 to 125 cases on that chart at any given time. We're at 445 right now. There's a nationwide spike. There are more cases. We're at 445. If 2 weeks from now, that's 220, I think we can all have a reasonable conversation. I don't think we're able to say, here are the hard numbers we're going to make decisions with, because look how much they've changed during this process. So I would come to you with a recommendation, explain why I'm making that recommendation, and answer your questions and have the conversation just like we're doing it now. That's where I think we would be. My hope is 2 weeks from now, we're looking at, instead of 32 bus drivers out, maybe it's 15. Instead of 445 cases, maybe it's 200. And then I think we're having a different conversation. My hope is by President's Day, we're having conversations about when are we going to make masks voluntary at the elementary. That's where you want to get. I don't think a hard metrics right now would be a fair ask, because we just don't know where this is going. 2 weeks in COVID has been crazy. 2 weeks ago, they announced, if you have it, you only have to stay home for 5 days. So things come out all the time, and we have to be nimble and be willing to change.
I do think that is the one thing that people, no matter what, agree on, though they're asking for those metrics. So I think once we're able to get those at some point, hopefully down the road, that would,
I'm not
Good.
sure what it would be.
yeah. I mean, I know we don't know what they are right now, but I think if that should be maybe a goal one day, that we can maybe work with public health officials and experts and try to quantify what we can quantify, just so people have some kind of heads up on what we're doing. I think parents want to be able to plan and just know what might be coming down the pipe, so I think it is helpful.
I mean, we've been through that going back these past 2 years, and Scott, please feel free to chime in because you sat in on the medical calls too. If we pulled up what we had as metrics originally, I mean, it's laughable at this point with the way that this has continued to evolve. I don't know how we specifically plug and play any sort of data at this stage based off of what we've been through because of the way that this has evolved and has the way each variant has evolved too. I share your feelings that we need to have something that we are measuring against, that it's transparent, that the community can have. At the same time, I don't know, having gone through all these conversations, sat through with the CATS folks, sat through it with our doctors, I struggle to figure out how we're going to pinpoint a specific data point that's going to get there. I mean, with cases alone, if we measured by cases, the ability in the present time with a rapid test, obviously it isn't what it was, but our ability to test is much different than it was back then as well. So naturally, the cases are going to rise. And now we're factoring in other things like hospitalization, the seriousness level of it. And I think that where we've gotten with student and staff absenteeism as one of the major drivers in terms of data has been critically important as we've evaluated what we've done.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think right now it's, cases are as high, higher than they've ever been. So, but I'm saying long term, I think it would be helpful. I think our community would appreciate something. I mean, cases aren't going to always, I hope, are not going to always be like this. I hope we're not always going to be in crisis mode. And I'm just saying, I think down the road, it would be helpful to have metrics so that people know what to expect.
We've been advised that we will shift to an endemic mode, which will be something that we'll be much better able to plan for. And I think we will have to have an endemic COVID plan, and what does that mean? And how do we respond to that? Right now, and I hate to say this as the superintendent of the Dublin City Schools, we're in crisis mode. We're operating on our team meets every day at 4 o'clock. Are we going to have enough bus drivers? What's the next thing we have to do to get people to school? What's our substitute situation? Our team met last night via Zoom on Sunday at 8 o'clock to make sure we were ready to go today. And we have a standing meeting. So right now, we're thinking ahead. Right now, Eversole and Depp are on a 30-minute delay so our bus drivers can get around. Grizel, Glacier Ridge, and Deer Run, if we have to do it next week, that's the next group on the rolling list of where do we have those. At some point, it could be Bailey, Scottish, and Wyandotte, because we know we need a middle school and a bunch of elementary kids to relieve some drivers to be able to roll this through. We're trying to plan ahead and trying to make sure we have our bases covered.
And back on the metric standpoint, a lot of people can probably attest that I pushed very hard in the past to have those metrics, and it was just such a moving target that we'd even make a decision at a board meeting Monday night, and then by Tuesday afternoon, the superintendent's changing that decision based on the available data at hand that day. So it is very difficult, but that is definitely something we can talk about as a group, taking forward if that's something we want to do, and try to come up with some guidelines or metrics around that.
again, I work for the 5 of you. If you want me to bring specific data points to these meetings, I think this has been one of the better and more open board discussions that, as a superintendent, I've been part of, because the public gets to see how we're struggling with this process. And it's not easy, and we have this struggle every day. So I am perfectly happy, Mrs. De Silva, to bring data that you request to this meeting. As I shared, I think that our team in Dublin is as well connected as anyone to the health departments, to the health officials, to the policymakers, and to the area leaders to be able to make decisions and bring you information that are part of our recommendations. Okay, so I have said, I haven't done this formally in the past, but I do think with the level of interest and with the board, I'd kind of like to know where you want me to go, because there have been some who say, oh, take the authority away from him to make these decisions, and I've said from the jump, I'll do what the 5 of you want me to do. So, Mrs. Gillis, what would you like? And we can have a conversation if there's not a clear consensus at the end. What would you like, and what can you support?
What I would like and what I can support, I think, are two different things. I would love mandatory masking. I would love for our exemption forms to be different. But I think in our short term, thinking about how are we safely keeping kids in school over the next 2 weeks, option 2 is the only thing that you've presented us with that I feel like we can do. I think a combination is I don't know if it works, and I think to mandate masking in high school is just the way that we have our exemption form currently is going to just be a flood of exemption forms, making it worse than we are now. Did that make any sense?
I'll come.
Okay.
If I'm understanding you correctly,
Yes.
you would like us to change the policy, make it so there wasn't an exemption form, and have every student wear a mask in high school. But understanding where we are now, you can support option 2 for 2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay. Mrs. De Silva.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best thing is for everyone to be in a mask, because we know that's what works best as far as slowing the spread of COVID. But at the same time, I know that our nurses are really struggling right now, and to have a mask mandate tonight and have them have to sift through all of these exemptions tonight and still contact trace would not be manageable. So I could support the mask mandatory option number 2 for the next 2 weeks. Still looking at, I still think we need to update, and for the record, I'm not against mask mandates. I know there are people who cannot wear, or mask exemptions. I know there are people who can't wear masks, and that it's difficult sometimes for people who are learning a second language or learning to read, that kind of thing. But yeah, I can support a mask mandatory option number 2.
Go ahead. You want to go last as president? I guess you get that right, Mr. Valentine.
I've drawn a fair amount of criticism for where I've stood on COVID-related issues during this time, because I've been at the forefront of trying to get kids back into school and or putting the choice into parents' hands. I think that Dr. Marshausen, you and our team are working incredibly hard to find that middle ground. We had the chance, Scott, to sit in on the medical call. I had several conversations independently afterwards with members of the medical committee to ask additional questions related to their perspective on this. I would agree with Dr. Marshausen that going into the call, I would say a majority of those folks probably would have leaned on recommending a mandate. At the same time, we also know that their advice tends to be on the more conservative side as well, and that needs to be noted. I would prefer to continue in our current course of leaving the option in the hands of parents. Just wait 1 sec, please. As the gentleman from Carr spoke about at the beginning of this evening, he talked about Board of Education, Common Goal, team, and so forth. And so I'm conflicted because there's a balance on my part of maintaining that parent control and at the same time knowing that we're going to likely come out of this evening's meeting with some sort of direction for you and our administrative team to go with. If we, and I have a feeling that where I stand is probably going to be in the minority, but if we move forward with number 2, I would like to see 2 weeks from now us to be very diligent in our response, and that this doesn't become a slippery slope of how do we continue to implement more that gets out of the hands of parents.
So if, just for my clarification, Mr. Valentine, you don't like to, but you can deal with it for 2 weeks because as a middle ground, you're okay, but you're going to want more information in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I am very reluctant, and we've talked about this. I am reluctant on what this means in terms of families that have made the decision to exempt for whatever reason or another. This situation, whether or not it's a mandate or not, the situation that it puts our staff in. And on that note, I think this is important to say. Donna, Donna's in the back. The relationship between the board, the administration, and the teachers union has continued to improve to a point. And I just want to thank Donna as we relate to this whole discussion because she plays an important part in being able to relay feedback to us, to help us navigate landmines, and that has been very important as we've tried to navigate the spot. But to go back to your direct response to your question, yes, I would like to see decisions left in the hand of parents, but if I have a feeling of where we're going, and I will work together as a team for the common goal.
Thank you.
Well, I now feel like I am on an island. I will say that. I am a proponent of the current masking policy for many reasons. What we haven't talked about tonight very much is the efficacy of these cloth masks that students are wearing. And one of the reasons that I asked about neighboring districts is, to me, whether the mask mandate is in place or it's not, whether it's enforced or it's not, this virus, especially this current variant, is going to do what it's going to do. And it's not what anyone wants, but it is the nature of the beast, so to speak. And these cloth masks are providing little protection, possibly in a controlled setting where we know that they're going to be worn correctly. You could maybe argue a point. Certainly with an N95, you could argue that point, but the way these masks are being worn in a school environment is, we've all seen it. It's inconsistent at best. They're constantly touching their face. They're removing their mask to eat a meal. They're walking through the hallways and it's on their chin. And the number of times they touch their mask, you know, we're trying to prevent a respiratory virus, and they're constantly touching it. I want to see what that mask looks like at the end of the day. I want to see the bacteria on that mask. And then that student is putting that mask in the backpack and wearing it the next day. I'm not trying to be inflexible. I just think that we need to make it make sense. And these masks constantly on our children, we've kind of been there, done that. We're heading into year 3 of this virus, and I think we're at a place with the new variant that, thank the Lord, is proving to be, you know, not as serious for the majority of people. Yes, it is more transmissible, but the severity of symptoms, and that's why we, you know, I was happy to hear earlier about hospitalizations with students and about severe illness and about hospitalizations with staff. So, you know, again, I always go back to what is the cost and what's the end point? Where are we trying, what metric are we trying to get to? Because if it's zero transmission, that is not going to happen. And again, we are on year 3 and we have to get back to life. I believe we are in an endemic. I mean, yes, we are experiencing a spike, which could have been anticipated based on last year at this time, people coming back from, you know, being with family, traveling, family events that they have. We can expect this, and we're in the middle of flu season. We are in the middle of, you know, normally under normal circumstances, this is a season where people are getting sick. And so again, I don't think the numbers are, yes, they're concerning, but is it time to, you know, shift course? I don't believe that it is, and I'm in favor of one. And I'm in favor of, you know, the contact tracing is just, it's untenable at this point. I mean, this virus, everyone is going to have it, whether you're vaccinated or not, boosted or not. It's making its way through and proving that all of these mitigation strategies are, you know, it's going to do what it's going to do, unfortunately. So the contact tracing, I think, is untenable, and I would recommend the letter, you know, sent home to parents and putting that in, you know, their decision. If their child is sick, obviously, please keep them home. And if they would like to send their child with a mask, send your child with a mask. You know, I'm just not a fan. Just as I wouldn't want someone to say to me, your child must be masked, I would never say to someone else, you cannot mask your child. I mean, that's just, it's not responsible. So I'm with one.
Okay, so you do have to go now.
So it's my turn.
It's your turn.
I could say a lot and probably go on for another 15 minutes here if I wanted to, but I like option 3 because it is preventative. It would help stop the spread. When we look at the numbers from October, as you indicated, in October we had at any given time 10 staff members out with COVID positive. When we look at the numbers for January, we're in the 90s now. So we need to do something to change the course that this virus is taking. So with that being said, I think option 2 is kind of that middle ground. It is on the reactive side, but it will put masks on people that hopefully prevent the infection and the spread. I would ask that if we do option 2, that we mandate masks for all visitors. And I would also like to see a mandate for all after-school activities. And I know there are challenges enforcing that, but we can maybe increase that from that 5 or 10% people wearing masks up to that 60 or 70% people wearing masks, and that will make a difference. Because this is not only a school problem, this is a community problem, the spread, and we need to try to stop it, to get it under control from a medical standpoint to relieve the pressure on the doctors and the hospitals and the community. So that is where I stand in my opinion.
Mr. Melody, just so that you know, the mask to stay process involves students and teachers. So teachers bus drivers who have to wear them anyway right now, anyone who is in that school job in the school setting. So if a teacher is in a room where a student is COVID positive, the teacher also falls under the quarantine process for mask to stay. So that will be done.
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
So I agree with Scott, Mr. Melody, on having visitors wear masks in after-school events.
I just want to make a final point. I think I agree with literally something, a part of everybody, what Mrs. Rigby said, Mr. Valentine, Mr. Melody, Mrs. De Silva. I think everybody has a piece that really is a part of this puzzle. My major concern is, I don't even think we've gotten into mental health yet. My children cannot afford to be remote learners at this moment in time. So my desire to go number 3, to go in whatever direction, I want to keep them in school as safely as possible. And that is why I am saying what I'm saying. And I believe you're absolutely right, Mrs. Rigby, about cloth masks and how do we fix that and how do we do something different. I would love to say, let's tear away all the masks. I want to keep my kids in school. And if that is on the table, then I don't want that option. I don't want any option that leads to us not opening a school building.
Yeah, I want to point out something else too. So we can debate about how mild or not mild this virus is, but if you're sick, you can't come to school. You just can't. So staying home and not being in school is an adverse outcome of this virus. Even if you're at home with just the sniffles and you can't come to school, that is an adverse outcome. And we should try to avoid that as much as possible.
With all due respect, Mrs. De Silva, any respiratory virus that we have been dealing with for the length of time and having children would require that child stay at home. I mean, this is, yes, everyone wants their children in school, but when your child is sick, you stay home. I mean, we can't wrap them in bubble wrap here. I mean, children are going to get sick. They got sick before COVID. They're going to get sick after COVID. And when a child is sick, then they stay home. And
right. The difference with this particular situation is that we have lots of people who are sick, and we have a virus that is highly transmissible, and we have a virus where some people are asymptomatic but still can pass it on to other people.
we do. So like the flu is,
Yeah.
it's an equivalent to the flu in that respect.
Well, that is highly debatable, but
So, as I try to get a clear understanding of where I'm going to go as your superintendent, it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if I say option 2 is the direction that we're going to go for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to bring data back. We're going to make sure that our staff get vaccinated. And are there 3 of you that want us to say that masks are required at all school events outside of the school day? Just to be honest, I struggle with something that we can't enforce. I try, one of the things that, as an educator and as a school leader, you never want to just say, I want you to do this, and this is the rule, but I can't make you follow the rule. I understand the desire, Mr. Melody. I don't know how to get there, and I don't know, if our principals and athletic directors were here, I'm not sure the position we put them in by trying to enforce something that I've got no mechanism to make people do it.
Right, I understand the difficulty in enforcing it. I mean, I think just a minimum having the sign at the door saying mask mandatory rather than please wear a mask.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do that, and we can put an announcement before the national anthem and at halftime reminding people that the Dublin City School District is asking you to wear a mask when you're in our school event to help slow the spread of COVID.
That would be my preference.
Okay, so everyone understands what I'm going to do based on what you want me to do. Is that a fair assessment of where we are?
I understand you're taking direction. I just, for the record, want to speak my opposition.
Okay. And I will have a similar length report with input for you on the data where we are on the 24th.
Can you clarify us just one thing that you said? The second thing you said was have our staff get vaccinated. I don't know
Did
if
I
you
say
misspoke.
vaccinated?
That's what you said, but I just want to make sure you say what you really meant to say.
I'm sorry if I misspoke.
Do you want to just repeat the three things? Your direction. You were mentioning the three things that you were taking away from this conversation. You can just repeat it.
You did say staff vaccinated when you were.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking. Oh, all right. We'll go with option 2. Our visitors will have to wear masks when they're in the school building. And we will ask that at events, people wear masks.
Yeah, it was prior to that.
I'm sorry. I'll have to go back. I've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes about this topic, so if I misspoke, I apologize.
So are you clear on the outcome and the direction?
We will be able to get this started tomorrow morning with the process for our students in our classrooms. Mr. Andrus is working right now to make sure that this is able to go.
Okay, thank you for the updates. All right, so moving on to our regular agenda now. We do have public participation for action items on the agenda. All right, there are 6 people signed up for public participation for action items on the agenda. Just a reminder that the public participation is limited to 3 minutes per individual, and that we do ask that you respect the time limits and respect the board and do not individually call out board members or decisions made by board members. We do value your input and want to hear from you, and I think we did post last week that in the future we are changing the way public participation takes place for items not on the agenda, and that is going to be effective next board meeting. So for items on the agenda this evening, we have Ashley.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Barnhart, and thank you for allowing me to speak. First, I'd like to welcome our new board members. As we look forward to working together to continue creating an equitable, inclusive, diverse, and safe environment for all children, I hope to clarify by speaking for a mislabeled group that the root of our frustrations is a deep and heartfelt desire to work together to reduce the divisiveness that is seemingly running rampant in our district. I believe that there is more common ground between the left and right, despite the name calling and letters to the editor and the attempts to silence one side, than most care to admit. Many of the presentations in previous meetings have been really hard to digest. They're difficult, they're uncomfortable, but they're conversations that we all agree must be had. Our goals are the same. We want to create a safe learning environment that supports the whole child while preparing them socially, emotionally, and academically. We understand that the opposing side is concerned about racial equality and promoting anti-racism in our schools and community.
Excuse me, the topic is supposed to be remote learning, item 15B.
This
what you
is
signed
in
up for?
regards to our community as a whole as we go forward with our schools.
Specifically on remote learning on the agenda.
Can I let me get there? We are adamantly opposed to any level of racism, and we are truly focused on digging deeply into how best to navigate this together. We desire to support our teachers and students as we find new ways to deconstruct outdated philosophies and social constructs while also conserving each individual's beliefs, values, identities, and preferences. What sets us apart is our genuine desire to create this for all students of all backgrounds, rather than cherry-picking which students are worthy of our care. We're not unaware or in denial of the realities of disparate outcomes. In fact, many of us fall into these categories. We desperately seek compassionate dialogue between the groups, but without transparency and access to pertinent information that impacts our precious students from the district, we are limited in what strides can be taken. As we begin this year and move forward with these options, I hope that we can see this as a fresh start, an opportunity to work together for our students and community. And to end with a quote by Malcolm X, "Ignorance of each other is what has made unity impossible in the past. Therefore, we need enlightenment. We need more light about each other. Light creates understanding. Understanding creates love. Love creates patience. And patience creates unity. Once we have more knowledge or light about each other, we will stop condemning each other. And a united front will be brought about." Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Okay, next up, Julia. Is Julia still here? Oh, here she comes.
Hello, my name is Julia Fix. I'm here tonight to urge the board to reject the resolution authorizing the superintendent to implement a blended learning environment for the 2021-22 school year. For the members of the public who have not read the resolution delegates the board's decision-making authority to the superintendent, authorizing him to implement remote learning on a district-wide basis at his sole discretion. This resolution contains no constraints on this authority, provides no parameters upon which this decision should be based. There's no time limit. There's no requirement that it be reviewed. This resolution gives one unelected district employee carte blanche authority to make a critical decision that affects the lives of over 50,000 people in this school district. There's absolutely no justification for delegating the sweeping authority to the superintendent. Any decision that is made on a district-wide basis should remain in the hands of the elected board members. Taking this decision out of the hands of the board members and giving it to an unelected individual is inherently undemocratic and provides no accountability to the Dublin voters. As we know, there are significant consequences to this decision. Nationally, remote learning has been a disaster for children. Remote learning disproportionately affects underprivileged students, has caused months of learning loss, contributes to poor nutrition, has high economic costs to society in general, causes isolation and mental health issues in students, and most tragically, it increases vulnerable children's exposure to violence and exploitation. Anyone making this decision should do so with prior notice to the public, allowing for public comment and input. This has the potential to profoundly affect so many lives. We should not circumvent the normal procedures. We must allow for public participation. The entire premise behind requiring these kinds of wide-sweeping decisions to be made by elected board members is to ensure that they are made with genuine justifications that can be scrutinized by the public. While there are very compelling reasons to have this decision in the hands of the elected board, there's an overwhelming lack of justification for delegating this responsibility to one district employee. The resolution could easily be narrowed to further the interests of responding quickly to a crisis. Instead, we are attempting to pass the buck so that you cannot be held responsible for the consequences of these decisions. The students of this district deserve better. They deserve a board that works toward their best interests and who does the job that this city elected them to do. Finally, I am shocked that I am not hearing more from this board regarding the documented detrimental effect that universal masking has on child development. The health and well-being of our children is of paramount importance. This harm deserves to be more than a footnote. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Next up, we have Herb. And it does say your comments are COVID and remote learning, but please specifically on remote learning, since COVID is not an action item on the agenda.
Okay. Well, my subject is going to touch both, I guess, the COVID as well as remote learning. My name's Herb Kirshner. I'm a resident of Dublin. I'm here tonight because I am concerned about remote learning and what impact it has on our child's education. But before I start there, I just want to follow up with the last comment on the masking. I think it's important to remember that the assumption that wearing masks slows down the spread of the virus does not take into account that a contaminated mask can actually lead to spreading of the virus. And so it's important when you consider masking, again, back to World Health Organization, United Nations Children's Fund, they say that you really have to follow those guidelines to properly maintain and wear a mask. And so if we're not following those guidelines, then we are going to be actually counterproductive in wearing a mask. And the other thing, when you actually look at the impact, again, I heard a discussion, it was a really great discussion, and that is that there's a downside wearing mask for the development of the child in the classroom as well as the learning and communication. So that has to be taken into consideration as well. In regards to the remote learning, I think it's safe to say that the children's education and development that in the classroom learning is far superior to remote learning. Just like many cities over the last 2 years, Dublin has experienced a negative impact of reduced in-class room learning. If you go to a site, ohio.gov, you can find a listing of the Ohio school report cards. There is a component on the report card titled Achievement. The achievement component represents whether student performance on state tests met established thresholds and how well students performed on tests overall. Well, if you look at that results on the performance index, for 2017 we had a 98.6% in Dublin. 2018 it was 99.60. 2019 it was 98.90. In 2020 it dropped to 85.3. In 2021 it was 87.10. So it's a major impact that we had over the last few years, and it was probably mostly attributed to the COVID, but remote learning. And so with such a major downside learning development, why would we ever go to remote learning again? What is the downside to in-classroom training? First of all, there's no proof that in-classroom training increases the spread of the virus. The overall risk of children becoming severely ill or dying from the COVID virus remains extremely low. In-classroom learning does not change that dynamic. In-classroom learning is not contributing to the overall crowding of hospitals or overcrowding of emergency rooms. Despite a rise in the number of infections, there's not a substantial rise in the children hospitalizations. The current number of confirmed pediatric hospitalizations with COVID in the United States is 3,342. That's according to the data from the Department of Health and Human Services released on last Friday, January 7th. Healthcare staffing is a real concern, with many healthcare facilities experiencing staff shortages.
Excuse me, Herb, your time is up. Could you please wrap up your comments?
Sure. But the classroom learning is not contributing to that. And I also want to say that I strongly believe that there needs to be some accountability associated with the blended learning environment program or resolution that's been passed. You really have to have some accountability associated with that because it's such a major impact it could have on the learning and the kids. So again, summary, do not ask the teachers, the children, and the parents to make major sacrifices by going back to remote learning. Keep our children in school, in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, Mark. Okay.
Thank you. So I believe we do not need to go back to remote learning either. As was said earlier tonight, there are no children, thankfully, hospitalized in this district right now for COVID, and neither are there any staff members hospitalized for COVID. So we are not in crisis mode. Yes, numbers are up, but again, no one hospitalized, so I don't understand all the hysteria. So in my opinion, I think you could just eliminate contact tracing altogether. It's pretty simple. If you're sick, stay home. If you're not, come to school and learn. So my concern is that this board might be moving towards a direction of eliminating the mask exemption forms and going back to remote learning. And let's be clear, the small percentage of students not wearing masks in school is not the reason for the widespread of COVID in our community. Putting more masks on kids is going to do nothing to stop this surge. We cannot keep going back to the same COVID protocols that have failed our children for 2 years and have simply not worked. You cannot stop this virus. It's going to do what it's going to spread where it wants to spread. And as we said earlier, too, neighboring districts that have masks optional have similar numbers as our district where there's a mandate in place. So again, if we eliminate this, the mask exemption forms, and if we go back to remote learning, I think that it would simply just be an abuse of power by this board. And speaking of, if you are going to advocate for an option that requires masks in external events, school events outside of school, then I think you yourself should be wearing a mask at this board meeting. So again, no one is hospitalized. We're not in crisis mode. I don't understand all the hysteria. I think we just basically need to move on. Thank you.
Okay, next person signed up is Amy. Amy?
Licata, 10310 Summer Sweet Way. Please bear with me. I did not intend to speak tonight, so I'm going to be looking down at my phone at the notes that I just jotted up here. Welcome to our new board members. I know we all have so many things on our plate, and we all stand on this issue of COVID in different ways. I'm speaking tonight because there is a vote to give Dr. M the authority to determine if we are remote or in person. I know we are struggling with staffing, and that sometimes last minute this might appear to be the best option we have. But I ask you to consider two things tonight, and every time a remote choice is being made. Our community. This community is something I've been a part of longer than I care to mention on record, but I've never seen us this divided. We need to focus on bringing us together, not dividing us further. These backdoor mask mandates, remote learning threats, and other data-less decisions that continue to divide us are not helping. Second, our children. We all learned, not only in this room, but across the United States, that remote learning negatively impacts our youth. Our children are now in the real pandemic, the pandemic of mental illness. We are continuing to look at mitigation options that have no validity or impact outside of alleviating staff hardships. While I feel for our staff, I feel stronger for our children. I think if we provide that authority to John, it would need to be consistent with other responsibilities given, like a snow day. This is something that should have a timestamp or a limit of 24 hours, especially since we are still part of the 2 weeks to slow the spread. Kids have had enough taken from them during COVID, and now the proposal as written claims safety for going remote, but all I'm hearing about is the staff impact. We need to stop imposing anti-data measures which just make things easier for adults and not focusing on our children. If the proposal is truly providing remote learning for easement of staff, not child safety, then amend it so that it can be transparent. We need to return our children to a normal, maskless education and start focusing on the mental health of our students. Thank you, and thank you to our teachers and staff.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And next we have Sherry.
Hi there, my name is Sherry Stryker. It's good to see you guys here tonight. I was really surprised to see 15B, I think it is, on the agenda. I don't know if there's a precedence for that, why that would be on the agenda, who brought that up, like why is it even a thing? And I know nobody's going to answer me right now. And then that kind of goes to a question that I've had, or several questions that I've had over the last 2 years that we've been in this COVID crisis. If you were to look at possibly putting us in a hybrid or remote, is it based on the numbers that we've been talking about for 2 years? For example, cases, okay? Cases are up now. Cases go up and down. This is flu and cold season. A couple years ago, before COVID, I was at work kind of joking with my coworkers about how there were so many kids out of school, they should just close the school down for a month and let everyone get better. Now, that wasn't going to happen, so why it's happening now is really crazy to me. But if you're looking at making that decision, what I would really like to look at is not the case numbers, because I could be standing here right now with COVID and not know it. But what I would like to look at is, of the cases that we have, how many kids or adults are actually sick, more than just a common cold? How many are being hospitalized in our district? And how many since March of 2020 have died? Those numbers right there would mean something to me if you were going to say, the whole board, we're going to say, we need to go remote because we got people in the hospital, we got people really sick, and this is not going to get any better unless we go remote. Looking at the case numbers, when you look at the last 2 years, it doesn't equal those reactions. So, and I don't know if you can clarify before you vote why this is on the agenda. That would be great, because I just don't understand. That hasn't been done in the past, or has it? And I just don't know about it. So that was what I had for you guys today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Okay, next up we have Board President and Board of Education comments and committees. I will say that when we did the shuffle at the beginning of the meeting, I forgot to make the comments I wanted to make, and I wanted to actually thank Chris Valentine for his leadership the past 2 years for being president. I know it's not what you signed up for 2 years ago when you volunteered to be president or were volunteered, but you did a great job leading us through the pandemic. A lot of ups and downs in there, and thank you for your service, and thank you for everything you've done. And then to Lindsay, Tiffany, and Diana, welcome to the board. I'm proud to be serving as your board president, so thank you and your confidence to me. And I think based on the discussion that we had earlier on the COVID and the direction we want to go, we showed that we can all work together and have respect and ask questions and answer questions and work well together. So I think that's off to a great start, and I look forward to continuing to serve with you for the years to come. So on that note, we don't have formal board assignments yet, so I don't know if anyone has any updates or anything they would like to say about board assignments or committees. Okay, not hearing any, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Marshausen for superintendent comments.
First, I'll begin by addressing some of the concerns from public participation. And I don't normally do that, but because this is a resolution that will be asking for your support, our intention as an administrative team, and it says in the agenda that we believe face-to-face is the best, and 100% I believe face-to-face is the best. The way I see this resolution is it gives me the same authority that I have in a snow day. If we had a day that we woke up tomorrow morning and Jeff calls me and says, we're down 44 drivers, we can't go to school, and we can't get our kids to school. And we had to, for one day, as we built the plan to figure out how we were going to do that, we would be able to shift a school or some schools to remote learning. And I don't see it as we're going to blend it, or we're going to hybrid, or we're going to remote. I see this as a one-day thing that gives us flexibility. And as we talked earlier, we get 5 calamity days a year. And if we get hammered with a bad winter during this COVID crunch, after 5 days, folks are coming back in June, or we're taking away days at spring break. So this is that emergency lever that you pull in the event, and this isn't. I don't want to go there. Our team has worked endless hours to come up with multiple scenarios right now with bus drivers. We have our entire admin team, NCO, ready to go be subs in buildings if overnight we get a bunch of absences. And we had central office directors at one of our elementaries on Friday to make sure that we could keep the doors open. We want to keep the doors open, and you won't find anyone more committed to that than I am. This is the legal requirement for the equivalent of a snow day that allows us to commit to have it as remote learning. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Dr. Marshall, real quick to jump in on that. So if in an instance where we had an emergency type of situation, and I think this is important to note, and we decide, if the power is amongst the 5 of us, and we decide we're going to call a school board meeting, Mr. Kern, how long do we have to give public notice before we can meet as a group to vote on something?
24 hours.
So it nullifies the ability to be able to even possibly do that. On the same note, let's say that you go rogue and you decide you're just going to throw us in remote learning. Mr. Kern, do we have the ability to call a board meeting within 24 hours and vote to, as a board to eliminate that decision?
You need 24 hours to post the notice.
So the control is still balanced. There's still checks. This is specifically for emergency cases. The extent to which our administration, staff, bus drivers, on down the line are filling multiple roles right now. The second, third, and fourth contingency plans that are in place to ensure that our kids are in school are all occurring. This is solely for emergency purposes.
It's solely for emergency purposes. Yes, sir. Okay. A couple things in my report, and I'll try to make this brief as we've there we go. All right, even though we're in the midst of COVID, we've got some pretty heavy topics we're going to have to work through. Some of them fall directly on my plate. Depp Elementary is overcrowded, period, end of story. Eversole Middle School is overcrowded. The numbers that were used in 2017, 18, 19 to make those decisions have proven to be inaccurate. Before mid-February, we're going to have to announce redistricting plans for Penny, Depp, Glacier, and Deer Run. And it's to the point we're not going to be able to keep the commitment that was made previous. Some kids who are at Depp are going to go back to Penny, and they may have been there for 2 years. Some kids who were at Eversole who are there this year may be back at Griselle next year. There's no way around the fact that there are just too many kids and too much growth in those areas. We've asked an external firm, Cooperative Strategies, to meet with us, to be the ones who do this redistricting for us. But that's why kindergarten registration, which normally would probably be in January, is pushed to mid-February, because we can't do kindergarten registration until we tell people where they're going to be. Our goal in this is to get us to 2025-26, to make the changes necessary so that we can come to the voters with a plan in 25, which without a doubt is going to include another middle school and another elementary school up in the Northwest Quadrant. We're growing. This is what we're going to have to do, and I know people don't like it. The honest answer is we got to be able to put kids in seats. Our option was like looking at 25 modular classrooms at Depp. And while we've got space in some of our other buildings, it didn't seem like an option. So this is going to be on our plate. It's going to be conversations at the next 2 board meetings, and we don't have time to wait a whole lot because we have to do kindergarten registration, we got to do planning for next year, and we've got to do staffing. So that's if this wasn't a COVID meeting, this would be the headline. but the fact that we've talked a lot about COVID mitigation strategies, but this is a headline issue. Our bus drivers, when we had to make the decision last week to cancel preschool one day and delay it, the bus drivers who drive those preschool routes all picked up additional routes before they went and ran preschool. Our bus drivers at Eversole and Depp right now, because we delayed those, are picking up a whole extra route. They don't know the kids, they don't need the route, they're adding extra time to their day so that we can get all of our kiddos in school. Our bus drivers are doing amazing work. Mr. Stark and Mr. Killian are doing amazing work to make sure that we can keep things running. And that's our ultimate goal, is to get the kids in school. I'd like to thank our preschool parents because they were the first ones with no notice. We put them in remote for one morning because we got hit with, we can't get kids to school tomorrow. And we've been asked, why don't we just let parents who can drive their kids to school drive their kids to school? Ohio Revised Code, K-8, we got to drive them. We have to offer transportation to all those kids. There are equity issues, that's just the law. You may have heard some school districts in times of levy failures that will suspend high school busing. We could suspend high school busing. It really doesn't help because the high school goes so early, you don't want your elementary starting at 7:30. So, and we believe this is short term. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, it takes a middle school and a large number of elementary kiddos to make it work. And we do have plans to roll this through the middle schools if necessary. We are hopeful that by the time we get to the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Day, everything's kind of leveled out and we're good to go. If it hasn't, we'll have to go to what's next. What's next? Griselle, Deer Run, Glacier. That would be what's next. We've been asked, why did you start with Eversole and Depp? Largest schools, so it saves the most drivers, and furthest away from the core, so it's easier to delay them as we move out. But the drivers who we ask to do the extra route, we can't keep asking the same people to do that. So preschool picked it up one week. This week it's the Depp Eversole drivers. If necessary, the next week it would be the next group of drivers. So we're trying our best, but our team has been amazing. I called Mr. Stark, last week, and he said, well, here are the buildings we can close. And my answer was, that's not acceptable. We've got to do something different. And his team came up with something different. We were design thinking process. It was a war room to make this happen. And it was actually, it was great to be part of such an amazing team to make this happen. But thank you to our bus drivers. They're the ones who are getting our kids to school. We've got custodians who are doing extra work, working overtime. We have our cooks and our classified folks and our maintenance crews. You know, if you think about, you could have 10, 15% of any group out on any given day. Everybody's picking up a little bit more. Our teachers are covering extra classes. So while I highlighted our bus drivers, everyone is doing a little bit more, and I am so honored to be part of this team as we work to keep our kids in school with face-to-face learning. Diversity update. As we look at the resignation of Dr. Hamilton, who I had the opportunity to talk to earlier this week, we are meeting right now with 3 different consultants to look at how do we provide the training that's necessary. Meeting with Mr. Stephen Francis. Some people know Mr. Francis. Dublin Dad runs a firm, has done work with us in the past, working with our partners at Ohio State. Are they a potential partner for us when we need assistance? And meeting with our leaders at the ESC of Central Ohio. I couldn't agree more with Ashley's comments that we have to bring ourselves together and we have to make sure that we have all of the resources in the right places in a unifying way. So we just want our community to know that we're moving forward. Also, as soon as appointments are finalized, and we had said we would get that parent committee up and running. Unfortunately, right now, we've been, as I said, we're a little bit in crisis mode, so we're a little bit behind of our schedule. Once those 2 board members are appointed, Mrs. Schwanke and Doug and those board members and I will sit down and go through the applications to work to get that committee up and running. And I apologize for the delay. As you can tell, we're spending some other time with some of our challenges. I've been working, and I've got the name of the firm that the city of Dublin is using. Mr. McDaniel provided that with me. We have a board retreat in May. My hope is by the time we get to May, I'll be able to provide our 5 board members with an outline for a strategic planning process for the district. I think it's critical that we look at academic goals, how do we set our measurement, and how do we support our students. So as we look at a strategic planning process, my hope is that when meeting with the same firm that's working with the city of Dublin, we can get alignment there. So I'll have an update for you. I'm meeting with those consultants in late January, and so my hope is that we can lay that framework, because right now, and it's become evident tonight, it's been evident in my time here since May, all the resources are here for us to perform at even higher levels. But we need alignment, we need goals, and we need that plan. So we'll continue to work on that. And then finally, and this came up, Scott and Chris can attest to the fact that at the end of our doctors meeting this week, a large number of those doctors are where I am. I'm not losing sleep right now about COVID. I'm losing sleep about the mental health of our kids. COVID's going to get to an endemic phase. We're going to get through this spike, and COVID's going to become something that doesn't monopolize our time. The mental health challenges that our students are facing, and it's doesn't matter your family's income, where your family comes from, whether you go to church or not, or how you live your lives, the mental health mental health issues are enormous. The Doctors Committee has committed to having a meeting solely about mental health. There are some mental health professionals on that committee. We've started to save the date for our Be Well event, which will be a partnership with the Worthington City Schools at the end of April. We're working and talking about Hope Squads at our high schools, and we continue to look at what are those resources available to our kids. We know as a parent, if you call Nationwide Children's Hospital right now, you're 4 to 6 months out before you can get your kid in. This weighs on all of our hearts, this weighs on what we do, and this has to become one of our focal points. And as a state, we can start to focus the same energy and commitment and resources that we've focused towards a virus, that we can focus that same commitment towards making sure our students are healthy and able to learn in our classrooms. And we're going to continue that work, and we're going to have a lot more for you as a board and for our community as we move forward. Are there any questions or any other things that I can provide at this point for the members of the Board of Education?
Okay, if there are no further questions, we will move on to item 15B, which is the blended learning environment proposal, or recommendation. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the attached resolution authorizing the superintendent to implement a blended learning environment for the 2021 and 2022 school year. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Valentine, second by Ms. Gillis.
Just
Questions or comments?
Re-emphasizing, it's emergency. We can change it.
I don't want to do this any more than I want to do a snow day. And I know there are some students here who probably would prefer that I call some snow days. The other piece of this, and Mrs. O'Connor and I have talked, our snow days will be snow days. There's not asynchronous learning on snow days. Our snow days are days where we want our kids to go play out in the snow and they don't have extra work and it's a snow day. So we want to separate that, but this is emergency use only.
Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
And Mr. Melody?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, Mr. Kern, treasurer comments.
Yes, just a few things. I know we've been here for a little while. This evening is the annual alternative tax budget, and really this is one of those things I always explain as those statutory or ancient, probably outdated statutory requirements to kind of prove your expenditures and kind of where things are heading. So it starts the process of when they start doing tax bills, which is actually be next year for 2023, because we've already started for tax year 22, but collection year 23. So this tax budget follows along, and like I said, my board update, the general fund is matching the 5-year forecast that was board approved in November. The debt service fund would follow the district's current debt service schedule, and the permanent improvement is the budget. And you've heard many, many times Mr. Stark talk about the permanent improvement, which is used to maintain our buildings that are and bus fleet, whatever it may be throughout the district. So, like I said, just one of those statutorial things. The next thing is our approval of the November financial report. There again, just a reminder too, the estimates are based off the November 5-year forecast. As you can see, we are in line at this point in the year with revenues and expenditures. We are over in revenues, which is a good thing, and under in expenses at this point. One of the things that you gave me a standing authorization is to collect tax advances. Many of you saw Franklin County was late getting their tax bills out and then moved back their tax collection date. But what we're able to do is start drawing on that those taxes that have been collected, and we're allowed to draw on 90% of those. So while we don't earn any additional interest very much anymore, as interest rates are, we have to be in very highly safe investments. It does allow us to be used for, and I want to earn some little bit of extra interest, but also used for operations that we need throughout the district. And then the last thing is one donation, and we're always happy from our partners throughout the community or our PTOs, as we have PTO presidents this evening to speak. But this one's a donation from Dublin Arts Council to Davis Middle School for an art challenge. So any questions on the agenda this evening for the treasurer action items?
Okay, if there are no questions, we will move on to item 16E. It is recommended by the treasurer that the Board of Education approve item 16B, the fiscal year 2022 alternative tax budget. Item 16C, the approval of the November 30th, 2021 financial report. And item 16D, the donation to Dublin City Schools. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Valentine, second by Ms. De Silva. Please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
And Mr. Melody?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, reports from the Department of Academics and Student Learning.
Okay, hello everyone. Just a quick note tonight. We are requesting approval to employ Peter Riddle for residency verification as required by Ohio Revised Code 3313.64 and 3313.65. Districts are required in the state of Ohio to verify residency of their students. And unfortunately, we do have multiple situations in which parents may attempt to enroll when they're not living in the district. More frequently, it happens when a family is living here and moves and does not tell us that they have moved. So at the cost of about $6,000 per student and sometimes significantly more, we do need to make sure that students who are attending our schools do in fact live here. So Mr. Riddle does lead those investigations. He does it for many districts in Central Ohio, and he saves us a significant amount of money. Just in the last 8 months, he has found 24 families who were not living here, saving us about $240,000 just in the last 8 months. So we will not exceed $15,000 for his services. And the last time we came asking to employ him was a couple years ago. So any questions on residency verification? Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So item 18A is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve fee payment to Peter Riddle Investigations for residency investigation services. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Department of Operations. Could you repeat that? I heard you the first time. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing it properly. That's a first, Jeff. So, thank you. Okay.
He'll make up for it later. We still have all of those Jerome resolutions coming your way.
Okay. All right. Reports from Human Resources.
Good evening, members of the board. I'll be brief. I'll start with the certified agenda. Tonight, on the certified agenda, you'll see a resignation of a supplemental contract and then 4 supplemental contract salary changes. And then there are also a few supplemental contracts on for your approval, as well as 2 pupil activity supervisor contracts that are Dublin Jerome. That's the only things that are on the certified agenda tonight. In the classified area, we have 2 resignations that are on for your approval. And then we have 9 new hires that will be joining our ranks in the classified area. And then in that part of the agenda, we have 3 unpaid leave of absences on, and then 7 salary changes on as well. The last item in Human Resources is 1 stipend, and it's for Leadership Academy. This is a professional learning conference by and for Dublin teachers that occurs annually right before the new school year begins. And that concludes what we have on for Human Resources. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. All right, item 21D. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve items 21A, approval of the personal action items certified, 21B, personal action items classified, and 21C, approval of the stipend request. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Please call any questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Reports from Office of Public Information.
Thank you, Mr. Melody. Good evening, everyone. I will be brief as well. I want to give you some numbers to start off the year as a baseline in terms of our social media. Twitter and Facebook both just went over 14,100 followers, so those are really strong numbers. I'll bring these numbers back to you every couple of months just so we can keep track of them, as my department does a lot with analytics with our social. Instagram, we're up to 7,500. LinkedIn, we're just over 4,000. We just crossed 500,000 YouTube views. A lot of that has to do with board meeting views, of course. We are over 4,000 individual, I mentioned LinkedIn. We're over 11,000 of our app has been downloaded. So the Dublin City Schools app continues to be popular, so we'll continue to promote that. So those are just some baseline analytics, and again, I'll bring those back to you every couple months and report how we are doing. Everything has been continuing to trend up. I wonder sometimes where is the ceiling and how long can things go like this, but so far with social media there has been no ceiling. So I want to give you some dates for your calendars, and I'll bring these back to you again as we get closer. Well, one is very close. One's tomorrow night. I want to plug the program that PERC is doing at Kaufman at 6:30 for 8th grade parents called Looking Ahead, Planning for Success in High School and Beyond. They always do really good programming, so I encourage anybody that can attend to attend that. February 26th is the Virtual Dublin Literacy Conference. Usually this is an in-person event at Kaufman that brings in educators from surrounding states, about 700 people. This one will be virtual. April 12th, we always have a summer job fair for students that my department does. We're doing that again, but it's got a little bit of a different flavor this time. There'll be summer jobs, but there'll also be, we're gonna have the trades represented in terms of, HVAC and plumbing and electricians, things like that, where you can make a career as well as internships. And so it's gonna have something for everybody in terms of students. That's April 12th. April 23rd is our Community Champions partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. Nominations are now open, so I'd encourage everyone to nominate deserving students and staff who have given back. That's a great program that's been around about 15 years now. Be Well returns April 30th. If you remember our partnership with Hilliard a couple of years ago, which focuses on student mental health, we're partnering with Worthington Schools this time. More details to come. And then some incarnation of dodgeball may return in May. And so we're working on that with Dr. Marshausen's committee. So more to come, but those are some, and Cheryl's excited about that possibility. So there's some upcoming dates for your calendars. Thank you.
And Mr. Baker, welcome back. And it's great to have Doug back and standing upright and with the smile back again, too. So thank you for all that you're doing. But we thank you. Even while Doug was recovering, he would get messages saying, I need this sent out, we need this sent out, and he would always respond right away, and we appreciate his leadership.
Okay, thank you. Now items 23 and 24, items for board discussion and future agenda items. Does the board have any additional discussion or requests for future agenda items? All right. We don't have anything additional. Then do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We do not need a second. Is that right?
Second.
Second, okay. maybe multiple seconds there. All right. Please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine.
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva.
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis.
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby.
Yes.
And Mr. Melody.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Thank you for everyone being here this evening.